The first item on the agenda is a presentation on the West Palm Beach Pension Fund. I think we've got some good news to share, right, Mr. Frost?
Relatively good news, Mayor.
Everything's relative, yes.
Thank you. Mayor, Commissioners, my name is Jack Frost, and I'm pleased to have the honor of being the chair of the West Palm Beach Police Pension Fund, along with my fellow trustees representing them here today, Captain Joe Ahern, Captain Troy Marchese, Craig Colley, and Dana Fragakis. The presentation today is by our actuary, Jeff Amrose, and his company at this point has a policy that they are unable to attend actually any meetings at this stage. So we do have Jeff hooked up on the phone, and I'll be in charge of the technology here. But I will now turn it over to Jeff. I think every one of you, except for Commissioner Fox, has heard his presentations in the past. So you can just picture that smiling face in front of you. Thank you. Jeff?
Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone, and good morning. And I just wanted to start by saying thank you to Jack and the... Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, well, I just wanted to start by thanking Jack, the mayor, and the commission for allowing me to participate in this meeting virtually. As Jack said, our company has a policy that won't allow me to travel right now, so again, I really appreciate it. Just by way of introduction, my name is Jeff Amrose, and I'm an actuary with Gabriel Roeder Smith and Company. I have about 25 years of experience as an actuary, and I've been the consulting actuary for the West Palm Beach Police Pension Fund for the last 10 or 11 years. So today what I'd like to do is provide you with an overview of the state of the West Palm Beach Police Officers Pension Plan. And I'm going to try to keep my presentation relatively short, 15 to 20 minutes, but please feel free as I'm going through it to interject with any questions or concerns you may have. As some of you may remember, I was here in October of last year to discuss the state of the pension plan. And since that time, obviously, there's been a lot that has changed in the world around us, but there hasn't been too much movement in the funding metrics for the West Palm Beach Police Pension Plan. Specifically, the funded ratio has stayed around 95%, which is a great level to be at, and the required city contribution has been relatively stable and is now at about 24% of payroll. It wasn't too long ago, and I'll be going into the presentation in a little bit, but just, again, as way of background, it wasn't too long ago that this pension plan had some bigger issues. In 2014, the required city contribution was about $10 million, and it was increasing each year. The funded ratio was decreasing each year, and the level of benefits was being reduced as state money was going to help fund the pension plan instead of going to the police officer's share plan. But again, since 2014, there's been very significant changes in the health of the retirement system. Today, we'll discuss two of the main reasons why the plan has seen better days recently, and those two reasons are the issuance of a $50 million pension obligation bond and strong investment returns inside the pension plan. We'll also talk about how the pension obligation bond has been working out for the city. We'll talk about the current level of the required city contribution, what we know about future levels of required city contributions, and we'll finally wrap up with a comparison of the West Palm Beach Police Pension Plan to other Florida public plans. But before we discuss these items, let me just give a quick introduction into the pension benefits that are provided to the police officers in West Palm Beach. The slides 3 to 7 of our presentation review the plan provisions of the three benefits that are provided to the police officers. So if we start by turning to slide 3 in the presentation, we see that the main pension benefit for police officers, which is calculated by multiplying three items together, is multiplying the benefit multiplier times the years of service times the average final compensation. And the benefit multiplier, which is different in each plan, in this plan it is actually two different numbers. It's 3% benefit multiplier for each year of service before October 1, 2011, and also after September 30th, 2017. And it's 2.68% for each year in those intervening years from October 1, 2011 to September 30th, 2017. Police officers can begin receiving their benefits at their normal retirement date, which is the earlier of three different age and service criteria. It's the earlier of age 55 with 10 years of service, age 50 with 20 years of service, or age 25 or 25 years of service, regardless of age. It's also very important to note that the police officers help fund their pension plan benefits. They contribute 11% of pay each time they get a paycheck, each biweekly paycheck. 11% of their pay is taken out and put into the pension plan. So, Jack, if you're able to turn to slide 4, here's where we review a second component of the benefits provided to the police officers, and that's the drop program. This allows police officers to retire from the pension for pension plan purposes, but continue working for the city for a maximum of 5 years. So during the period of drop participation, an officer's monthly pension plan benefit is accumulated and is paid to the member when he or she terminates employment with the city. These payments of the drop earn 4 or 8% interest depending on the performance of the assets inside the pension fund. Slide 5 reviews the third component of the benefits that are provided to officers, and this is the Sharepoint Benefit, which is funded by annual premium tax revenue. And the amount of annual premium tax revenue is allocated equally among the active members, provided they work a full year. To give you a sense of what benefits this provides to the members, the annual premium tax revenue for 2020 was $1.6 million. There's approximately 285 active officers, which translates into roughly $5,600 per officer for this past year. Slides 6 through 8 goes through a numeric example of the calculation of the regular benefit, the drop benefit, and the share plan benefit for a sample police officer. In the interest of time, I won't go into reviewing these unless you have questions now or at the end. I'm happy to go back to it. So let's go to slide 9 to discuss the history of the pension obligation bond.
And Jeff,
In July of 2016, the proceeds from a $50 million pension obligation bond were deposited into the pension plan. As a result of this deposit, the plan's funded ratio increased from 82.4% to 97.1%. The amortization payment on the unfunded accrued liability, which was the main component of the required city contribution, decreased by about $6.5 million. If we turn to slide 10, we can see that the issuance of the pension obligation bond has worked out very well for the city so far. The investment return on the $50 million that was deposited into the pension plan has been about $15.3 million as of June 30th, 2020. The city has paid about $6.9 million in interest to the bondholders. So based on this, you can see that the interest earned in the pension plan exceeded the interest paid to the bondholders by over $8 million. $8.4 million has been how it's worked out in the city's favor thus far. As discussed before, in addition to the issuance of pension obligation bond, the pension plan has seen strong investment returns, and this has really helped the pension plan. So if we look at slide 11, we see the investment returns the plan has seen since 2012. These returns have been extremely strong and have averaged about 10% during this 8-year period, and that's 10% per year. After this presentation was prepared, we also were informed that the return for fiscal year ending 2020 was estimated to be at 5.6%. And while that is a little bit short of the assumed rate, it's still extremely good considering the pension plan was probably minus 15 or minus 20% back in March of 2020 when the pandemic was impacting the financial markets at the greatest level. So although 5.6% is where we'll end up about for the fiscal year, it's short of the expectation, but it's a much, much better position than we were in 6 months ago. If we turn to slide 13, we'll see the results from our October 1, 2019 valuation report, which determined the required city contribution for the fiscal year we're currently in, fiscal year ending 2021. And there's two components of the required contribution. The first component is the employer normal cost. And essentially what this represents is the value of the accruals from the officers in the pension plan. This is important, and we're going to talk about this on the last slide also when we compare the value of the benefits provided in West Palm Beach versus other plans in Florida. But specifically for this plan, the employer normal cost is about $4.2 million, about 16.25% of covered payroll. The second component of the required city contribution are the amortization payments on the unfunded accrued liability. And based on Florida statute, when there's a change in the unfunded accrued liability, the pension plan gets to pay that off over a period of time not to exceed 30 years. The amortization payments in this plan are $1.95 million, or 7.54% of covered payroll. So from this slide, we can see that the required city contribution for fiscal year ending 2021, again, the fiscal year we're currently in, is $6.15 million if the payments are made throughout the fiscal year, and $5.93 million if they were made at the beginning of the fiscal year. So let's turn to slide 17.
Jeff, this is Jack. Two things.
Yeah.
First off, the commissioners, if they would like, we have these slides available for them, and they can be forwarded to them. So, because, you know, there's a lot of information that you're giving out here. So if you just let us know. Secondly, and maybe we should just go ahead and forward it to everybody if we could. Secondly, for the commissioners, our assumed rate is 7.5%. So when we were talking about the 5.6, it's a little lower than the 7.5. And we used to be at 8.25. We've lowered it over the years gradually to work with the city, and we're now at 7.5. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jack. And yeah, I could certainly forward the presentation to everyone so they could see it. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the 7.5% assumption in a little bit. But slide 17, if we could jump to that talks about what we know about the level of future required contributions. And where the city contributions are going to go will largely be dictated by what happens in the financial markets. If we have more investment years like we've had over the last 10 years, we're going to see downward pressure on the required city contribution. If we see investment years like we experienced in all financial markets from 2000 through 2009, we're going to see upward pressure on the required city contribution. But that's an unknown. We don't know what's going to happen there. There are some things that we do know. So the first thing is that the board will be reviewing two assumption changes in connection with the upcoming 2020 valuation report. And that 2020 valuation report will determine the required city contribution for next fiscal year ending in 2022. So again, two assumptions that we'll be reviewing. The first assumption is the possible lowering of the investment return assumption, which is currently at 7.5%. And like Jack said, we've made a lot of progress in moving that investment return assumption down from 8.25% down to 7.5%. Well, as we do every year, we'll be discussing looking at that assumption, making sure it's still reasonable. The second assumption change that we'll be looking at is actually a required change based on the Florida statute. And this will require us to use the same mortality table that the Florida retirement system is currently using. This new mortality table actually has higher mortality rates than the current table. Based on that, we would expect a decrease in the required city contribution due to the updating of the mortality table. So just to summarize that, there's two potential assumption changes. One is mandated, and we know we'll get a reduction in the city contribution as a result. And the other one is something that we look at year by year, and that's lowering the investment return assumption, which we may not lower it at all. We may lower it and offset the decrease we get for the mortality changes, or we may lower it that it results in a net increase in the required contribution. That's conversations that we'll have with the board at the upcoming meeting. Another thing we know is that there is $6.2 million of unrecognized investment losses as of October 1, 2019. And just to give you a sense, if we just recognize these unrecognized losses immediately, the required city contribution would increase by $600,000. So that basically means that over the next several years, we have $600,000 of upward pressure on the required city contribution. And finally, the last thing we know is the actual return for fiscal year ending 20 is going to come out to be around 5.6%. Based on that, we expected 7.5%. We only got 5.6%. There'll be a very modest actual loss due to that, which will put small amounts of upward pressure on the required city contribution. If we turn to slide 18, we can review the funded ratio of the plan. So what is the funded ratio? It's simply the amount of the liability that's covered by your plan assets. As of October 1, 2019, the funded ratio in this plan was about 94%. And that's very healthy when compared to other public pension plans across the country, and even specifically in Florida. In Florida, for our plans, we have roughly 130 plans, 90 of which are on my team. The average funded ratio is in the mid to upper 80% range as of October 1, 2019. So this plan actually is at 94%, which is a better place to be. Finally, slide 20 shows a comparison of the employer normal cost for several of the public safety plans in Florida. Remember, the employer normal cost represents the value of the annual accruals for the officers in each of these pension plans. So it's a representation of the level of benefits provided in these plans. And this slide should give you an idea of how the benefit level in West Palm Beach Police Plan compares to other Florida public pension plans. It's not meant to be an exact measure, since many of these plans are using different actual assumptions, which could result in different employer normal costs. But it should give you a good general idea. So from this slide, we see that the employer normal cost for West Palm Beach police officers is, as I said before, 16.25% of pay. The average employer normal cost for 20 public safety plans in the state of Florida, you can see, is 23.08% of pay. And again, this slide is just meant as a way to benchmark sort of the level of benefits in many different public safety plans in Florida. So that concludes my review of the PowerPoint presentation, and now I'll turn it over to you to see if there are any questions or comments you may have.
Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Fox?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I just have a question about the last slide. I'm wondering, well, I guess in general, is the pension, is it dependent at all on the budget and the negotiations every 3 years, or is this basically the pension is the same all the time, but for, I guess, dips in the financial market and things like that?
There are portions of the pension at a budget. The multiplier is something that's negotiated from time to time. Am I correct?
Yes.
Any other elements of the pension that are part of the union negotiations?
I would think that some of the other, the multiplier for one, and there are other terms that could be negotiated, but that's the primary one.
Yeah. Follow up, Commissioner? Okay. Mr. Rodriguez, you want to speak to that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. Jose Luis Rodriguez, Chief Human Resources Officer. As Mr. Frost mentioned, the multiplier is a negotiating item. There could be some other items in terms of like years of service to qualify, but it's also mindful to keep in mind that it's all also statutorily set. So a lot of the changes, even if you tried to negotiate them, you would still have to go and get a bill to modify the statute that governs it. So it's mostly governed by statute, is the short answer.
Thank you. Commissioners, I think that a major takeaway, and I'll get you, Commissioner, from this is the health of the pension plan. One of the slides showed that I think the average was like in the mid-80s in terms of funding ratio. We were at 94%, which is outstanding. And as you may hear in some of these dire economic times that we're hitting, some cities may have difficulty, some municipalities may have difficulty funding their pension obligations because they're not in as good shape as we are. That's some good news to take away from this, is the health of our pension with respect to the city's obligations. Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for bringing up the health. I know that we all get the emails from the National League of Cities and the State League of Cities, and that is often a topic of conversation. So I'm pleased to see that in West Palm Beach we're doing well. My question actually has to do with the listing in the agenda item. I wasn't sure if we're also discussing the West Palm Beach, is it a separate pension fund for employees of West Palm Beach, or is this,
Okay.
it doesn't
Confusion.
distinguish police pension funds, so I just wanted to be sure I knew what
This
we.
is strictly the police.
Yes.
The fire have their separate. The general employees, basically, I think it's sort of a 401K, and there's a legacy plan. There used to be a general employees plan that went away in the early 90s.
And will we be getting updates on those as well?
Yeah, we certainly can, and that was an oversight. It was intended to only be the West Palm Beach Police Pension Fund presentation, but at the board's, discretion, we can do a presentation on the pension plan for the general employees as well as fire.
Mayor, if I could follow up?
Yes.
Well, is there, I don't want to cause more meetings if we don't need them, but I don't know, is this an annual meeting that we typically have for police? And so do we have annual meetings for the others as well?
In the past, we have tried to coordinate with fire because the general employees is a very small plan now. Like I say, it's a legacy plan. The fire, we always have felt would probably be a good fund to also update because similarly it has an impact on the budget and also on understanding what the benefits are that our first responders are getting, and generally they're quite good.
Very good. And thank you, Administrator Johnson, for noting, I guess this one should have read West Palm Beach Police Pension Fund.
That is correct.
Thank you.
I think the other thing, which may not be as good of news, is that, and one of the slides showed the potential increase or the impact on the general fund of an increased amount that the city is going to have to contribute depending upon certain factors. I don't know where that slide is, but I think what was in the $700,000 range potentially. Am I right on that?
Yes, right there. Well, actually, the 700,000 was to the good.
Okay.
Then the other is regarding if we lowered the assumption rate any further than 7.5.
Okay. All right.
And there,
Now,
at
we
the
may
bottom
have some
there-
modest investment losses, I guess.
Exactly.
Okay. And we don't know what impact that might have on the general fund. But it's too early to tell.
I don't know if Jeff, at this stage, I don't think it would be a major one.
Okay.
Yeah, Jack, I can't hear all the questions, but it seems like the question now is if the 5.6% return will have a significant impact on the required city contribution. And the answer is no, because it's a little bit short of the assumed rate, but then there's asset smoothing that takes place, and then there's an amortization of the loss. So that by itself will not have a significant impact on the required city contribution.
All right. So that is good news.
And 2 points. Well, we were talking about other municipalities here being funded in 80%, 85%. There are some like Chicago, I think some of their funds are funded only to 30%. And I think the state of Kentucky is funded at 18%, where these the sponsors have not been paying in their required contribution for years and years. Same thing in New Jersey. They just stopped paying because they didn't want to find that money in the budget anywhere. So again, I'll reemphasize the mayor's point, and we try and work hard to maintain a healthy fund. On the brighter side, just actually, the bottom number is right now, our fund is about $392 million. So roughly $400 million, which puts us, for a municipality, as a pretty good sized fund. And we have just recently made a commitment to make an investment in the Grand,
Oh, yes.
which is coming forward, and we're planning to invest $5 million, which is about 20th of what they're looking for in their initial funding range. So we feel it's very prudent. The numbers look very good, the projected returns, but even more so, the benefit that it can provide to our officers, our first responders, is just a wonderful benefit to the city.
Yeah. Jack, can you all speak to, and I know in our meeting I asked the question, the advisors and whether we have any minority firms that are acting as advisors to the pension fund?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Glad you brought that up because our fixed income manager is Garcia Hamilton, and they manage about 30% of our money, which 30% of 400 million. And it's a minority firm. Jana Hamilton and Gilbert Garcia are the two principal partners. Gilbert actually has been in the forefront of a program involved with an organization that helps place undergraduates in summer internships in Wall Street, minority undergraduates. And he actually was recently honored for that work along with Mayor Bloomberg. So, and then I know one of our law firms, Saxena White, is a minority firm, and perhaps there are others, but it's something that we do want to keep in mind.
Please, please. Commissioner Lambert.
Thank you. Jack, I just want to make sure I understood what you were just talking about a little bit ago when you said we're looking to invest into the Grand. Do you mean the housing development project?
Yes.
Oh, fascinating. So we're going to be investing into that, and that's workforce housing, so hopefully will benefit some of these officers that we're discussing. Is that?
Exactly, and we've been very careful to ask them, there are extra benefits that they can provide for first responders that they plan to do, which is basically an early opening, early window for them to be first in line. There are certain things they can't do out of fair housing, but whatever they can, they're planning to do.
Great, thank you.
Great. Any other questions, commissioners? Well, very fine presentation. Thank you all very much. A lot of good news, and we look forward to more good news in the future as we get on the other side of this mountain, hopefully.
Yeah, many happy returns.
Yeah. Okay, okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
you.
much.